I first laid eyes on Greenbridge Oak Estates during a mild spring afternoon. The sky glowed bright azure overhead, and meticulously trimmed lawns stretched out in every direction. Ornamental shrubs, symmetrical flower beds, and pastel-colored houses lined the streets as far as one could see. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked like it belonged in a glossy advertisement, quiet, orderly, and well-kept. When I pulled my sedan up to the real estate agent's office for the first time, I couldn't help admiring the neighborhood's sense of calm. Soon after, I discovered that the local homeowners association, called the Greenbridge Oak Estates HOA, was quite influential. The agent mentioned how the HOA enforced strict guidelines about house colors, front lawn decor, and even mailbox design. I had no personal qualms with a well-run HOA. From my perspective, a bit of structure often kept a neighborhood tidy and property values stable. Little did I know I'd soon cross paths with the HOA's self-proclaimed ringleader, a middle-aged woman named Ms. Barbara Alcott, though everyone, behind her back, called her Karen. She had a reputation for intrusive oversight and absolute conviction in her own authority. As for me, my name is Nathan Blake, and I hold a position that most neighbors wouldn't guess at if they saw me mowing my front lawn in basketball shorts. I'm the State Energy Commissioner, with broad oversight over electrical distribution policies, infrastructure projects, and energy regulations throughout the state. I don't typically announce my job to casual acquaintances because it's not always relevant to daily life. Plus, I've found that avoiding mention of my position helps me maintain a sense of normalcy in my personal community. In the first weeks after I moved in, I met some friendly neighbors, a retired couple who loved gardening, a young family with twin toddlers, and a local teacher excited to have a supportive environment. However, every conversation sooner or later included a warning about Ms. Alcott. She calls herself a caretaker of the neighborhood, sighed Mrs. Green, the teacher. But she's the reason half the residents here are too scared to plant a bush without triple-checking the bylaws. Unwilling to rely on rumors alone, I merely nodded and thanked Mrs. Green for the heads-up. Maybe Ms. Alcott's methods were heavy-handed, but I assumed there must be a reason for it. I told myself not to jump to conclusions until I saw the situation firsthand. I didn't have to wait long. The day after I finished unpacking, I found a thick envelope in my mailbox stamped with the official HOA emblem. Inside was a 7-page letter, complete with bullet points and bold headings, welcoming me to the neighborhood and outlining the many rules: how often I must trim my hedge, the permissible range of front porch decor, the exact shade of paint allowed for the garage, and an entire page dedicated to trash can placement on collection days. At the bottom of the final page was a note in looping script: I trust you'll comply with these regulations. If you have questions, the HOA board meets every Thursday at the community clubhouse. You may call me in advance if you wish. Warm regards. Ms. Barbara Alcott, HOA President. Warm regards, indeed, I thought with mild amusement. For the moment, it all seemed fairly standard, just extremely detailed. Nothing was too surprising if one is used to HOAs. But that was before the heatwave, and before I discovered just how far Karen was prepared to go to maintain her iron grip on Greenbridge Oak Estates. The scorching summer heat arrived earlier than expected that year, blanketing much of the state under an unrelenting sun. Power usage surged in the city and its surroundings as households and businesses cranked up the air conditioning to cope with daily temperatures hovering above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius. Weather stations began broadcasting advisories, urging residents to stay hydrated, limit outdoor activity, and watch out for elderly neighbors or pets. I was lounging in my living room one afternoon, reading through state-level power grid reports on my laptop, quietly monitoring the overall capacity and consumption trends. My phone buzzed every few minutes with updates from various offices. Despite being off-duty locally, I always kept a close eye on potential energy crises. Rolling blackouts or brownouts can happen when the grid is overburdened, so part of my job is anticipating and mitigating those scenarios. Suddenly, there was a sharp rap on my front door. I rose, wearing a lightweight polo shirt and shorts, only to open the door and be confronted by a tall woman in her late 40s or early 50s. She stood ramrod straight, a thick binder of documents clutched to her side. Her eyes, gray and steely, roamed appraisingly over my entrance as though searching for a transgression to correct. "Mr. Blake?" she asked, voice clipped. "I'm Ms. Barbara Alcott, president of the Greenbridge Oak Estates HOA. You might know me from our letters." I nodded politely. "Good afternoon." "Yes, I recognize your name." Her expression remained serious as she shifted her binder. I'm here to ensure you're settling in properly and abiding by neighborhood rules. I see you have a small American flag by your mailbox. Did you fill out the decorative item approval form? I paused, trying not to show my surprise. It was just a modest flag on a short stake, the kind you see around national holidays. I didn't realize it required prior approval. The HOA welcome guide did mention decorations, but it was mostly about seasonal inflatables and large displays. This is just a small garden flag. She gave a disapproving sniff. Well, you may want to remove it or at least submit the form for permission. We need to maintain a consistent aesthetic in the community. I wondered if she might be joking. She wasn't. All right, I said non-committally. I'll look into it. Her gaze then flicked past my shoulder, peering into my living room. Through the open door, she might have spotted the hum of my air conditioner. It's extremely hot this summer, isn't it? She remarked. We've had record-breaking temperatures. I nodded, suspecting some point was incoming. She continued, we in the HOA believe in communal responsibility. We're trying to discourage residents from running their air conditioning units at unnecessarily low temperatures during peak hours. By doing so, people can reduce our neighborhood's overall electricity footprint. While such measures can indeed help a strained electrical grid, it struck me as odd that she would personally police each home's AC usage. Typically, local utility companies or the city run voluntary programs, like time-of-use pricing or energy alerts, rather than an HOA. Still, I tried to keep my tone even. Yes, it's important to be mindful of consumption. However, with temperatures over 100 degrees, people still need a safe indoor environment, especially children, the elderly, those with health conditions, and even healthy adults who can suffer from heat exhaustion. She waved her hand dismissively. I'm well aware of that. I'm simply informing you of the new policy the HOA board decided on. At peak hours, from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., we request that thermostats be set no lower than 80 degrees Fahrenheit. We will be monitoring compliance. I raised an eyebrow. Monitoring compliance? How? She straightened her shoulders further. We have our ways. Neighborhood patrols, observational checks, even third-party reports. Everyone here is expected to comply with these guidelines for the good of the community. There it was, a subtle threat. If I didn't follow her thermostat standards, I might face some kind of reprisal. This approach certainly felt heavy-handed. Yet I decided not to argue the merits of her policy on the spot. I just replied calmly, I'll keep it in mind. Her expression flickered, as if expecting me to bristle and fight back. When I didn't, she returned to her official posture. Wonderful, Mr. Blake. Should you have any questions or concerns, do let me know. Also, about that garden flag, I expect the required form or removal, whichever comes first. With that, she turned on her heel and left, binder tucked under her arm. I stood there, the hot breeze brushing my face, feeling a blend of incredulity and mild annoyance. In my professional capacity, I had championed some energy conservation measures, but all my efforts were about partnering with communities and offering incentives, not walking door to door to enforce mandatory temperature settings or tiny decorative rules. That was my introduction to Karen. I knew from that moment forward that tensions might develop, but I never guessed how extreme they would become. Over the next couple of weeks, the heat wave strengthened. City officials declared a Stage 2 heat emergency, urging residents to take maximum precautions. Hospitals began to see an uptick in heat-related illnesses. On social media, local utilities posted real-time alerts, advising people when the electrical grid was nearing capacity. As the state energy commissioner, my office worked around the clock with power companies to ensure the system could withstand the demand. So far, we had avoided rolling blackouts, but it was a delicate balance. Meanwhile, in Greenbridge Oak Estates, Karen's thermostat rule took effect, and she didn't stop there. She updated the HOA website with a long list of approved cooling methods, insisting that residents keep their windows shuttered, use fans, or rely on kiddie pools for children. She wrote cautionary bulletins about excessive energy consumption and even threatened fines for non-essential air conditioning usage. Some neighbors complied to avoid conflict. Others quietly resisted, refusing to jeopardize their comfort and safety. The tension simmered. A handful of folks confided in me, noticing I didn't appear to be fully on board with the new regimen. A neighbor named Carlos, who had a heart condition, was especially anxious. I can't handle 80 degrees in my house when it's 105 outside, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. I don't want to risk my health, but Karen is making daily visits, scolding me about my AC usage. I sympathized. There was no official city or state rule capping residential AC to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. If anything, we actively told people to find relief from the extreme heat. This was purely Karen's personal crusade. My official capacity remained hidden, though I was sorely tempted to reveal it and override her nonsense. But stepping in too early could inflame matters. From personal experience, I knew the best approach was to remain calm, gather information, and intervene only if absolutely needed, particularly in a small community where an HOA had its own governance structure. I did, however, keep an eye out for any sign of real danger. Then I heard from a neighbor that Karen was scheduling a special energy compliance HOA meeting. The rumor was that she intended to propose new, even more draconian rules. Some said she was contacting the local utility directly, trying to ask them to limit power to Greenbridge Oak Estates during peak hours. That last point seemed so absurd I initially laughed it off. No legitimate utility would just let an HOA president unilaterally curtail the entire neighborhood's power supply. But Karen's doggedness made me uneasy. She had connections in the city's zoning office and had boasted to more than one neighbor about her ability to pull strings. Curious about what she was up to, I decided to attend the upcoming HOA meeting in person. It was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse, ironically at 7 p.m., right in the middle of the day's hottest hours. That Thursday evening, the air felt stifling, even with the sun low on the horizon. Temperatures still hovered in the mid-90s. I walked to the community clubhouse, a low-slung building with large windows and a sign listing the monthly schedule of events, yoga, art classes, potluck dinners, and of course the HOA meetings. Inside, the stale air carried a hum of activity. About 20 residents were seated in folding chairs arranged in neat rows. At the front, Karen stood behind a small podium, wearing a crisp linen suit, her ever-present binder of regulations laid out like a legal tome. Beside her sat two other board members, who looked uneasy as they shuffled papers. The moment I stepped in, Karen's gaze locked on me. If she was surprised I bothered to attend, she masked it well. I found a seat toward the back, crossing my arms casually. The hush in the room thickened as Karen cleared her throat. "Welcome, everyone," she began. "Thank you for joining this special session of the Greenbridge Oak Estates HOA. Due to the unprecedented heat wave, we must address pressing issues related to energy consumption. Our neighborhood is known for its unity and shared values, namely, aesthetics, safety, and environmental responsibility." She flipped a page in her binder. "I've convened this meeting to propose a new set of regulations that will ensure we all do our part in conserving electricity, thus preventing the dreaded brownouts or blackouts many fear." A hand shot up from the front row, an older gentleman I recognized as Mr. Huang. "Ma'am," he asked, voice trembling slightly, "with all due respect, the local news says we haven't had blackouts yet in our region. Are we certain these new rules are necessary?" Karen nodded solemnly. "That's precisely my point, Mr. Huang. We haven't had blackouts yet, but it's our responsibility to ensure we're not the ones pushing the grid to its limit. Hence, we must be proactive. Because of a few homes in this community that insist on running AC excessively here," her eyes flicked toward me and Carlos, who sat a few rows apart, "we all face potential disaster." Carlos raised his hand. "I have a heart condition, Ms. Alcott. My doctor said that extreme heat can be harmful. Shouldn't personal health come first?" Karen pressed her lips into a thin line. "Of course, health is a concern. That's why I encourage fans, hydration, and limited AC usage, but only within reason. You can keep your home at 80 degrees, can't you? And if that's not sufficient, perhaps you can visit an air-conditioned community center during peak hours. We can arrange volunteer drivers if needed." Murmurs rippled through the room, some sympathetic to Carlos, others simply uncomfortable with Karen's draconian approach. I decided to speak up for the first time. "Ms. Alcott, are you proposing an official bylaw that mandates thermostat settings for every home? Can the HOA legally enforce that?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Blake, as you're new here, perhaps you're not fully aware of the HOA's reach. We maintain the right to establish regulations that protect the aesthetic and communal integrity of our neighborhood. While environmental policies aren't explicitly stated in older documents, the board can interpret those documents to encompass energy conservation rules." I nodded thoughtfully. "That's quite broad. But what if a homeowner chooses not to comply?" Her voice hardened. "Noncompliance would result in escalating fines, and if those fines remain unpaid, we have the authority to place a lien on the property. We could also terminate certain neighborhood privileges, pool access, clubhouse usage, and so forth. No one wants it to come to that, of course." At this, the second board member, a woman named Denise, cleared her throat. Barbara, might we also address the rumor about contacting the utility company? Some neighbors are concerned about the possibility of forcibly limiting electricity. This caused a stir in the room. Karen's eyes gleamed. I'm glad you asked, Denise. Indeed, I've spoken to a few contacts about the possibility of imposing a temporary partial shutdown of our neighborhood grid during peak usage. Nothing is finalized, but it's an option. Think about it. A brief, scheduled outage from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. might save thousands of kilowatt-hours daily. We'd be pioneers in responsible energy management. A wave of gasps and protests erupted. Someone exclaimed, "You can't just cut off power when it's 105 degrees outside. That's insane." Another shouted, "Kids and seniors could die from heat stroke if AC is off too long." I clenched my jaw. This was exactly the kind of misguided power play I'd feared. A forced blackout in one pocket of the grid could create dangerous conditions, not to mention significant liability for the HOA. And from a regulatory standpoint, a local community can't simply tell the utility to cut service for an entire zone without going through multiple legal steps, plus utility approval. Karen raised her hands for calm. We would, of course, provide ample warning and be sure that anyone with critical medical needs is relocated to a cooling center or hospital if necessary. We're not heartless. We're just facing a crisis that demands bold solutions. I spoke up again, my tone measured but firm. This is a very risky plan. Have you consulted with actual energy experts or with the county? And are you sure the utility company is willing to comply with such an unusual request? She pursed her lips. I've spoken to my friend at City Zoning, and I've left messages with the utility's public relations department. The details are still in progress, but I assure you, Mr. Blake, if I decide it's best for Greenbridge Oak Estates, I'll make it happen. We'll show the entire city how to handle a heat wave responsibly. Her self-assured rhetoric chilled me more than the idea of a scheduled power cut. A glance around the room confirmed the residents were uneasy, frightened even. Some left the meeting early, whispering about contacting lawyers. Others stared, uncertain if they dared challenge Karen's unwavering confidence. I sighed inwardly, feeling the weight of what might come next. If Karen truly intended to orchestrate a partial shutdown, she might well be crossing into territory that fell under my direct jurisdiction as the state energy commissioner. I vowed to keep watch, stepping in more forcefully if it went beyond mere talk. In the following days, the heat wave only intensified. Temperatures soared to record-breaking levels, topping 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 43 degrees Celsius in some areas. The local news channels featured constant warnings: limit outdoor work, check on neighbors, and beware of heat exhaustion symptoms. The hospitals reported an alarming number of heat-related admissions. Meanwhile, in my official capacity, though silently so within the neighborhood, I worked with utility companies to enhance capacity and expedite additional energy supplies from neighboring states. Every hour, I monitored real-time data on electricity usage. The entire state was under strain, but I was confident that with cooperation, we could minimize disruptions to the grid. We'd avoided forced blackouts so far. Then one afternoon, I received a frantic knock at my door. It was Carlos. His face glistened with sweat, and he looked pale, struggling to catch his breath. "Nathan, you won't believe what's happening. The HOA contractors, they're messing with the circuit boxes. They said Karen sent them." My eyes widened. "What do you mean, messing with the circuit boxes?" Carlos took a moment to inhale. "Some utility van. I don't think it's from the real power company. It just had a generic contractor logo, came onto our street. Two men got out and started opening those metal enclosures near the sidewalk, the ones covering the main circuit connections. They told me they were adjusting the neighborhood's voltage capacity under HOA instructions. But they looked like amateurs. I demanded an explanation. They told me to talk to Karen. Alarm bells rang in my head. Private contractors tampering with a local distribution subpanel without official approval? That was an incredible liability. Not only could they cause blackouts, but they could start electrical fires or damage equipment. I quickly thanked Carlos for the info and hopped into my car. I drove toward the main thoroughfare of the neighborhood, scanning for a suspicious van. Sure enough, about half a mile down Oak Terrace Lane, I spotted a white van with no official utility markings, just small text reading "Pro-Volt Contracting." Two men in reflective vests stood near an open metal enclosure, rummaging around with tools and clipboards. I parked and approached them, heart pounding. "Hey there, can I help you?" I asked, sounding casual but inwardly fuming. One man glanced at me. "HOA business," he said gruffly. We're making some necessary adjustments to reduce overvoltage issues. It's authorized. Overvoltage issues? That was nonsense. The real utility had data that the voltage was stable. This was clearly Karen's attempt to forcibly limit power in the area. I see. Who specifically authorized this? I asked, doing my best to remain calm. They exchanged looks. Finally, the older man shrugged. President of the HOA. We got a call from Ms. Alcott. Said she'd pay us to dial down the line feed so houses won't overdraw power. We do what the client pays us to do. I shook my head in disbelief. You realize that tampering with the electrical distribution system could be a crime if you're not working under the official utilities direction, right? This line is not private property. It's part of the municipal power infrastructure. The younger man's face paled slightly, but the older man rolled his eyes. Lady said the HOA had the rights. That's between her and the city, not our business. You want us to stop? Call her. I immediately took out my phone and placed a call to the local utilities emergency line. I identified myself quietly as a state official, though I didn't broadcast this for the contractors to hear. After a brief conversation, the utility representative assured me they'd send a legitimate crew and, if necessary, law enforcement to handle the situation. I turned to the men. I strongly suggest you pack up your equipment and wait for official direction. You don't have the authority to do this. They both looked annoyed, but perhaps sensing trouble, they started to close the enclosure. I watched them gather their gear and retreat to the van. As they pulled away, I caught sight of a phone number for Provolt Contracting, licensed electricians. The next call I made was to the state's licensing board. Not 5 minutes passed before Karen herself arrived in her SUV. She stepped out, slamming the door in frustration, binder perched on the passenger seat. Mr. Blake, she snapped, marching toward me. I just got a call that you're interfering with an authorized HOA project. I folded my arms. Karen, you can't just hire random contractors to modify the electrical feed. That system is managed by the official power utility under state regulation. You're risking severe damage and public safety hazards, not to mention breaking the law. Her lips curled back. Don't lecture me about the law. I have every right to protect this neighborhood from an impending power surge or grid overload. If the city or state won't do it, the HOA will. I've read the bylaws. I shook my head firmly. Your bylaws do not supersede state and municipal regulations for public utilities. Her nostrils flared. You're new here, Mr. Blake. Maybe you don't understand how things work. We do what's necessary in Greenbridge Oak Estates. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed, an update from the utility contact letting me know an inspector and possibly the police would be coming. I calmly placed the phone back in my pocket. Karen, for your own sake, I'd strongly advise you not to continue tampering with the grid. You're playing with people's lives. She let out a derisive snort. I know exactly what I'm doing. If that's all, I have more pressing matters. She spun on her heel, climbed into her SUV, and took off in a spray of dust. I stood there, heart pounding with anger, scanning the row of houses shimmering in the late afternoon heat. The stakes had just skyrocketed. Karen wasn't content with mere thermostat policing. She was actively trying to rewire the neighborhood's power supply. If she pushed any further, I'd be forced to take direct action. The next morning, I awoke to find that temperatures were projected to reach a staggering 113 degrees Fahrenheit 45 degrees Celsius by mid-afternoon, breaking a century-long record. The city urged mandatory water conservation, the local Red Cross opened extra cooling centers, and talk of rolling blackouts began to circulate. The grid was under immense stress. My phone buzzed repeatedly with updates from my staff. I authorized additional measures to bring in electricity from surrounding states, but we were nearing the limits of what the transmission lines could handle. Everyone braced for possible short, controlled outages in the hottest part of the day to prevent a total collapse. In Greenbridge Oak Estates, the tension was palpable. People mostly stayed indoors, blinds drawn, fans whirling on full. Some confided in me that they were terrified Karen would succeed in forcibly cutting off power. Others, particularly the older residents, expressed real fear for their lives if the AC went off. Around noon, I decided to drive by the local substation that fed our neighborhood, an unremarkable fenced enclosure a few miles away. Typically, it was guarded only by a locked gate and sometimes roving utility security. When I arrived, my heart nearly stopped. A battered pickup truck was parked haphazardly by the entrance. The chain on the gate looked recently cut. The fence door swung slightly in the breeze. I parked, rushed out, and approached cautiously. Inside the substation yard, near the transformers, I could see a figure tinkering with a control panel. The figure wore casual clothes, a gray t-shirt and jeans. Definitely not a uniformed utility worker. Next to them on the ground lay a binder. In the sweltering midday heat, I could almost see waves of distortion rising from the machinery. I called out, "Hey, stop." The figure jerked around, and I recognized that determined, hawk-like expression, Karen. She glared at me, sweat dripping from her brow, face flushed. My mind raced. This was not only trespassing, it was incredibly dangerous. High-voltage lines snaked through that substation. One wrong move could cause an explosion, electrocution, or a massive power outage. "Karen," I bellowed, stepping closer but not too close to the live equipment. "You need to leave immediately. This is illegal and incredibly hazardous." She clutched a large switch lever, her eyes wild. I tried to get the utility to cooperate, but they wouldn't return my calls. "This is an emergency measure, Mr. Blake. The state isn't doing enough to prevent a meltdown of the grid. I'm saving our neighborhood by orchestrating a brief shutdown. Are you out of your mind?" I shouted. "You can't just shut down an entire substation. You'll cut power not only to this neighborhood, but to other areas, too. Maybe thousands of homes." "That's the point," she snapped. "A short-term outage is better than an uncontrolled blackout. Once I reduce the load, we'll all be better off. I'm sure the utility will thank me later." My blood ran cold. She was about to do something catastrophic. A substation wasn't a toy you could switch on and off at will. Moreover, none of this was her call to make. In that moment, the weight of my responsibilities came crashing down. I realized I had to put an end to this, not merely as a neighbor, but as the state energy commissioner. Lives were at stake. I raised my voice in a commanding tone. "Barbara Alcott, stand away from that switch. By the authority vested in me as the state energy commissioner, I'm ordering you to cease and desist immediately. You're committing a felony by tampering with critical infrastructure." She froze, eyes widening. For an instant, the only sound was the electric hum of the transformers and the roar of a scorching wind. What do you mean you're the state energy commissioner?" "I regulate power grids for the entire state. I've tried to keep my personal and professional life separate, but you've forced my hand by threatening the safety of countless people." Her face flushed even deeper, whether from heat or anger, I couldn't tell. "You're lying. This is a bluff. You're just some busybody who moved here." I cut her off. "Check my ID." I pulled my wallet out, carefully holding it so she could see the official state badge. "I have full legal authority to manage and protect the energy infrastructure and the backing of law enforcement. Now step away." She faltered, hands shaking on the lever. For a second, I thought she might comply, but then something in her eyes hardened. She yanked downward on the lever, her final, desperate act of defiance. A deafening crack echoed through the substation, followed by a surge of sparks. The nearby transformer hummed dangerously, and the overhead lines rattled. My heart slammed in my chest. If she disrupted the circuit incorrectly, it could blow fuses, start a fire, or worse. Instinct took over. I lunged forward, grabbing her by the shoulders and pulling her away from the equipment. She shrieked, stumbling backward. "You have no right to manhandle me." A second later, a meltdown of sparks shot up from the control panel she had been fiddling with. Smoke curled into the air. Then, a loud pop, and the substation fell silent. In that moment, a wave of dread washed over me, understanding that the power to thousands of homes might have just been cut. Karen glared at me, breathing hard. "There. It's done. Now we'll see who's in the wrong." I whipped out my phone, calling the emergency utility hotline. The operator recognized my name and status immediately. "Commissioner Blake, we're seeing an unexpected drop from the Glendale substation. Is that where you are? Are you safe?" "I'm fine," I replied breathlessly. "But we need a team here immediately. There's been illegal tampering, and the substation might be damaged." The operator said reinforcements and the police were already on their way. I ended the call, stepping back to stare at Karen in disbelief. "You just knocked out power for thousands in the middle of a lethal heat wave. Do you realize how many people could suffer? The elderly, hospital equipment, children at home? This is unconscionable." She tried to keep her composure, but a flicker of doubt passed across her face. We'll get them back up soon enough, once the grid stabilizes. This is for the greater good." I shook my head. "No, Karen, this is a crime." She opened her mouth to retort, but just then, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the air. Police cars and a utility response truck skidded onto the gravel outside the substation fence. The gate was still wide open, chain cut. Officers jumped out, guns drawn, though they quickly realized it was a technical crime scene, not an armed conflict. As soon as they saw me and recognized my credentials, they descended on Karen. She tried to protest, waving her binder and sputtering about HOA authority and emergency measures, but the police read her rights and cuffed her on the spot. I stood to the side, a mix of relief and fury coursing through me. The substation crew rushed in to assess the damage, hoping to restore power before the brutal midday heat claimed more victims. Meanwhile, Karen, still in handcuffs, shouted threats that she'd sue everyone, that she'd tell the mayor, that the HOA would bail her out. But the officers showed no sign of sympathy. I pressed a hand over my brow, sweat pouring down from the relentless sun. We had avoided an explosion or a massive substation fire by luck. But thousands of residents were now without power, and in these conditions, every minute counted. Within half an hour, an army of utility workers swarmed the substation. Dressed in heavy protective gear, they carefully inspected the damaged control panel, replaced blown fuses, and reconnected severed circuits. Meanwhile, my phone rattled off nonstop as my staff relayed updates on partial power losses in the region, coordinating with local emergency services to check on impacted areas. The good news was that Karen's sabotage hadn't severed all power lines. It seemed she had thrown a switch that isolated part of the distribution circuit. This had triggered a cascade of protective measures to prevent equipment damage, effectively shutting down supply to a large section of the neighborhood and beyond. But the system was recoverable if we moved quickly. By early afternoon, the outside temperature soared to 112 degrees Fahrenheit. We needed power restored fast, or the risk of heat stroke would skyrocket. I contacted the local emergency management director, who agreed to deploy buses with air conditioning to the region. Paramedics and volunteers were urged to check on vulnerable residents. Simultaneously, I instructed the utilities field supervisor to treat this substation as a top priority. Time felt painfully slow as I watched the engineers reconnect cables, run diagnostics, and confirm that no further tampering lingered. At about 1:30 p.m., the lead technician gave me a thumbs up, indicating partial power restoration was commencing. Street by street, house by house, the lights and AC units flickered back on. Reports trickled in that the crisis in Greenbridge Oak Estates was subsiding. Neighbors heard the hum of their air conditioners reviving. The pure relief in their voices, even through phone calls, was palpable. Yet, some areas just beyond our immediate neighborhood boundaries still struggled. I knew a thorough check of the entire distribution route was necessary, but at least immediate meltdown had been averted. In the midst of this, I gave a statement to the police about what had happened and handed over my phone, which had recorded part of our altercation with Karen, including her pulling the lever. They assured me she'd be held for questioning. Given that she'd been caught red-handed, she faced charges like felony vandalism of utility infrastructure, trespassing, and reckless endangerment, among others. Neighbors approached me as the substation scene calmed. Carlos was among them, looking exhausted but grateful. I heard what happened. You actually put a stop to it. Thank you, he said, almost teary-eyed. I nodded, still feeling raw. I'm just sorry it came to this. She crossed a line that never should have been crossed. Officers gently ushered the onlookers away so the utility workers could finish repairs. I explained to Carlos that the power would likely be stable soon, but to keep an eye on any official notices. As the sun blazed overhead, I could only hope that no one had suffered serious harm during the brief outage. Even a short time without cooling in this weather could be dangerous for the frail. I carried a lingering anger that Karen, so fixated on control, had risked countless lives. At the same time, my duty as Energy Commissioner meant focusing on swift resolution and letting the legal system handle her punishment. By evening, the substation was fully operational again, and the local utility declared normal power supply restored across the board. Emergency services confirmed that while a few elderly folks experienced mild heat exhaustion, there were no fatalities in the neighborhood, thankfully. The crisis had been close, though. Karen remained in police custody, and the rest of the HOA board scrambled to do damage control. I learned from a neighbor that the board had convened an emergency session that afternoon. In a swift move, They unanimously voted to remove Karen from her position as president, disowning her actions as rogue and unauthorized. It was apparent that none wanted to share in her legal liabilities. News of the sabotage made local headlines. The story was sensational enough. HOA president arrested for illegally shutting down power during record heatwave. Some outlets discovered my identity and ran pieces like, State Energy Commissioner exposes Homeowners Association saboteur. It was not the kind of spotlight I wanted, but at least it shed truth on the fiasco. Over the next few days, I coordinated with city officials to ensure that those impacted by the outage received any necessary aid, like reimbursements for spoiling groceries or help with medical bills arising from heat-related symptoms. The utilities legal department prepared its own case against Karen for property damage. From behind bars, Karen attempted to contact a few individuals in the neighborhood, presumably searching for supporters. Word spread that she insisted she was only doing what was best for everyone, that her heroic measure had been misunderstood. But no one seemed eager to defend her. One morning, I received a call from the county prosecutor's office, requesting my testimony. They explained that Karen was likely facing multiple felony counts. Depending on whether her sabotage directly caused any serious injuries, she might be facing a significant prison sentence. As the days turned into a week, the scorching heatwave gradually began to relent. Temperatures dropped to the mid-90s, still hot but more manageable. Life in Greenbridge Oak Estates returned to something resembling normalcy, though the specter of Karen's actions lingered. The new interim HOA president, Denise, sent out a letter apologizing for the ordeal, pledging more transparent governance, and reassuring residents that no mandatory AC restrictions would be enforced. While grocery shopping one weekend, I ran into Ms. Green, the local teacher. She looked relieved but also conflicted. "I feel awful I didn't stand up to Barbara sooner," she admitted. "We all knew she was controlling, but we never dreamed she'd go that far." I nodded. "Well, let's just hope we all learned a lesson about letting one person dominate with fear. If anyone sees something dangerous, it's crucial to speak up." She thanked me for intervening, then hurried off to the dairy aisle. I took a moment to reflect. It had been a whirlwind of a summer, far more eventful than any new homeowner would expect. But I suppose that was the risk when an HOA Karen clashed with the highest levels of state energy authority. Several months later, the heatwave was but a searing memory. Autumn's cooler breezes turned the leaves golden in Greenbridge Oak Estates. The neighborhood had calmed. People no longer feared random intrusions on their thermostats, and the substation now boasted enhanced security measures, a reinforced fence, additional locks, and routine patrols. Karen's trial became a local media spectacle. A flurry of legal arguments surrounded the potential charges: felony vandalism of critical infrastructure, reckless endangerment, criminal trespassing, and possibly more. Her defense team attempted to paint her as an overzealous but well-intentioned citizen who felt compelled to take preventive measures in a crisis. They argued that the actual damage was minimal and that the outage lasted only a short period. However, the prosecution built a compelling case around the catastrophic potential of her actions, backed by expert testimony from utility engineers who explained how her flipping that switch endangered thousands of lives. The defense's claim that she intended only a controlled partial shutdown was quickly dismantled. The system is far too complex for an amateur to manipulate safely. I took the stand as a key witness, identifying myself in full. Nathan Blake, State Energy Commissioner. I described what I witnessed: Karen physically tampering with the substation controls, ignoring repeated warnings that she was placing people at grave risk. I also explained how, had her sabotage escalated, it could have triggered a domino effect of widespread blackouts, substation fires, or even electrocution. The courtroom was hushed, absorbing the gravity of it all. Neighbors also testified about Karen's prior intimidation tactics, including the attempts to enforce strict AC limits, her statements about scheduling forced blackouts, and the confrontation with the contractors. Each testimony painted a picture of an individual obsessed with control, devoid of genuine concern for others' safety. In the end, it took the jury only 3 hours to deliberate. The verdict: guilty on multiple felony counts. The judge spared no words in condemning Karen's reckless disregard for human life. She handed down a lengthy prison sentence, citing the potential for massive harm. Additionally, the utility companies pursued civil action, leading to heavy financial penalties that Karen would never be able to pay off in her lifetime. As a result of the liens and fines, her property was seized, the very home in Greenbridge Oak Estate she'd tried to rule over with an iron fist. The HOA board immediately revoked her membership, a mere formality after all that had transpired. The local news channels aired footage of her sentencing. She appeared stunned, as though never imagining her power games could end this way. From self-styled neighborhood savior to inmate, a cautionary tale repeated across the region. After the trial, the new HOA leadership reached out to me both to apologize for the chaos and to ask if I'd be willing to consult with them on legitimate energy conservation strategies. I agreed under the condition that everything be voluntary and educational, not coercive. Real energy solutions would come from collaboration, technology rebates, and well-planned load management, never from paranoid sabotage. With Karen gone, Greenbridge Oak Estates finally breathed easy. Residents joked that maybe we should rename the place Phoenix Estates, given how it rose from the ashes of chaos. But mostly, people were just glad to see normal life restored, mowing lawns without fear of fines, running AC to safe levels in the scorching sun, letting small flags wave by mailboxes without bureaucratic nightmares. I stayed in the neighborhood, happy to have both a peaceful home and the knowledge that I'd done my duty to protect the community. Occasionally, I found myself replaying those final moments at the substation in my mind, the spark, the sizzle, the near disaster. It could have been so much worse. Yet, out of the fiasco came a stronger sense of neighborly solidarity. We saw each other's vulnerability during the worst of the heatwave, forging new friendships in the aftermath. Potluck gatherings replaced tense HOA meetings, and a spirit of genuine cooperation emerged. And so that was how a meddling HOA Karen brought the entire neighborhood to the brink of calamity by shutting down the electric grid during a deadly heat wave, never suspecting her new neighbor was actually the state energy commissioner, with the authority and resolve to put an end to her madness. Her hubris led to a well-deserved downfall, prison time, loss of property, and a forever tarnished reputation. Meanwhile, the rest of us carried on, determined to build a safer, kinder community in Greenbridge Oak Estates, proving that even in the face of scorching temperatures and one person's dangerous obsession, cooler heads and hearts can prevail.